The wind carried with it the raw bite of winter, though the calendar claimed spring had already arrived. In the wilderness of the Dakota Plains, seasons did not answer to dates on a page. They answered only to the will of the land. Snow clung stubbornly to the pine branches, and the air smelled of smoke and earth, a reminder that firewood was running low and survival was never guaranteed. On the edge of a clearing stood a cabin, small, hand-built, its logs fitted with care, the gaps sealed with clay and mud. It was not a settler's home nor a tribal dwelling. It was something in between, belonging to a Lakota woman who had chosen neither the full embrace of her people's camp nor the proximity of the growing town of white settlers. Here, she lived with solitude, and here she learned the language of silence. That night, silence was broken. A pounding knock rattled her cabin door. It was heavy, desperate. 3 quick strikes, then another, as though the hand outside feared both rejection and discovery. She rose from her seat by the fire, her fingers tightening on the handle of the iron kettle she had been holding. Few visitors came this far uninvited, and fewer still at night. "Who comes?" she asked, her voice firm though her heart raced. No answer came immediately. Then a low voice, raw with exhaustion. "Please, I just need shelter. One night." She hesitated, moving closer to the door but not yet unlatching it. Through the cracks of the wooden frame she caught a glimpse. A tall figure slumped against the post, his hat pulled low, his coat torn at the sleeve. His boots were caked in mud and one leg bent awkwardly, as if he had stumbled a long way. Her mind raced. A white man, out here, away from the roads and towns. Nothing about this boded well. Yet the desperation in his voice pulled at her instincts. Slowly, she unlatched the door and pulled it open a hand's width. The man looked up, his eyes bloodshot from travel and lack of sleep. He had a rugged face, marked not just by the lines of age, but the harsher lines of hard living. A revolver hung at his hip, but it looked more like dead weight than a threat in that moment. He tipped his hat weakly. "Ma'am, if you've a corner of floor and a roof to spare, I'd be in your debt, just till morning." The Lakota woman studied him carefully. She had learned to measure men not by their words, but by the way they carried themselves, the tension in their shoulders, the tremor in their voices. This man looked hunted, not just by others, but by something within. Himself. She opened the door wider, her voice low and steady. "You may come in, but understand, this place is not safe for you." He nodded, stepping inside with a limp. The warmth of the fire hit him like a wave, and he nearly collapsed by the hearth, clutching his side. She noticed then the dark stain, seeping through his shirt beneath the coat, an old wound, not fresh, but untreated. She set down the kettle and moved closer, her eyes narrowing. "You bring trouble with you." His mouth curved into a weary smile, the kind born of pain. "Seems I carry nothing else these days." For a moment, neither spoke. The crackle of firewood filled the silence. She handed him a clay cup of water, and he drank as if it were life itself. Then she spoke again, her words laced with both warning and truth. "My people already whisper against me for living here. They say I am too close to the ways of settlers. If they find you inside my cabin, they will destroy it because of you." The cowboy met her eyes then. Gray eyes, clouded with fatigue, but sharp with understanding. He did not argue or protest. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though accepting a burden he already knew too well. "I won't bring harm to you," he said softly. "Come morning, I'll be gone." She studied him, once more weighing his words. Something about the resignation in his voice stirred an old memory. Her father's words. "Every man who wanders carries a story, but not every story is meant to be heard." Still, this stranger's story was already at her threshold, and she had no choice. but to let it cross. The night deepened outside, the wilderness whispering with wolves and wind. Inside the small cabin, firelight flickered across two weary faces, one hardened by solitude, the other by pursuit. The woman did not yet know what chain of events she had set into motion by opening her door, but she could feel it, like the stillness before a storm, and though she had warned him, though she had spoken the truth of what her people might do, a part of her heart had already chosen to risk the fire. The cabin smelled of pine sap and smoke, the scent of freshly split logs stacked near the door. Firelight flickered across the rough-hewn walls, chasing shadows into the corners. The cowboy sat close to the flames, his hands stretched toward their warmth, the raw ache in his body visible in every movement. The Lakota woman kept her distance. She busied herself with stirring a pot of broth, though her eyes never lingered, long on the food. Every so often she glanced at the stranger. His coat was worn thin, the fabric fraying along the edges. His boots, though sturdy once, were now cracked and uneven, dusted with miles of prairie earth. He looked like a man chased far beyond his limits, yet still clinging to survival by sheer will. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the bubbling of the pot and the steady crackle of firewood. Finally, she set a clay bowl in front of him. "Eat," she said simply. He looked up, surprised by the gesture, then nodded his thanks. He ate slowly, as if savoring every mouthful, the steam rising around his unshaven face. After several moments, he leaned back with a sigh that was equal parts relief and fatigue. "You saved me tonight," he murmured. "I don't know how. Far, I'd have made it otherwise." She did not answer immediately. Instead, she fixed him with a level stare, her dark eyes gleaming in the firelight. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but edged with warning. "You should not mistake shelter for safety. This place is not yours to claim. My people already mistrust me for choosing this life, living apart, building a cabin instead of a teepee, keeping the ways of both worlds, but belonging to neither. And now, you..." She gestured toward him with a flick of her hand, her expression unreadable. "If they learn you spent a night under my roof, they will not forgive. They will destroy my cabin because of you." The words hung in the air like smoke, stinging even though they were spoken without malice. The cowboy lowered his gaze to the fire. He let the flames fill his vision, listening to the wood hiss and pop. He had known fear before, fear of bullets, of betrayal, of hunger. But this was different. This was the fear of bringing ruin to another soul, someone who had shown him kindness when she had every reason to turn him away. "I understand," he said finally, his voice low. "I never asked you to risk yourself. Come sunrise, I'll be gone. You won't hear my name again." But the woman shook her head, her braids brushing her shoulders. "It is not so simple. You came here wounded, hunted. Tracks in the snow do not vanish with the dawn. My people will see them. They will ask questions. And if they find blood or scent of gunpowder..." She stopped, her lips pressing into a thin line. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He glanced at his side where the wound throbbed beneath his shirt, a painful reminder of the ambush that had sent him fleeing. His pursuers would not rest until they had him bound or dead. He had dragged his trouble across the prairie and straight into her home. "I won't deny it," he said, meeting her gaze at last. "I'm being hunted, but not for what they claim. The lawmen chasing me, they're not after justice. They're after silence. I saw something they wanted buried, and I paid the price for speaking. That's the truth of it." Her eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of deceit. The firelight flickered across his face, illuminating the sharp lines of honesty or desperation. Perhaps both. "Truth or not," she replied quietly. "The flames Do not ask for reason before they burn. All they need is a spark." The cowboy fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down harder than his injury. He stared into the fire until his vision blurred, memories rising like ghosts, faces of those he'd tried to help, the sound of gunshots in the night, the sheriff's cold eyes when the noose had nearly found his neck. At last, he spoke again, his voice rough but steady. "Then maybe I should leave now. Better me out in the dark than you losing everything because of me." But she shook her head once more, firm this time. "If you leave tonight, you die before morning. The hunters are still close. Their kind will circle like wolves until they smell your trail again. No, you stay. But understand this. If my cabin burns because of you, I will not weep. I chose the fire the moment I opened that door." Her words struck him like a stone, cold, unflinching, yet laced with a strange mercy. For all her warnings, she had chosen to let him in, to give him food, warmth, and a chance to live another night. The cowboy leaned back against the log wall, exhaustion dragging at his eyelids. "Then I'll make you a promise," he whispered. "I'll not let you pay for my sins. If the fire comes, I'll be the one to meet it." For the first time that night, a faint shadow of a smile touched her lips. She did not speak, but her silence was no longer cold. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin. Two strangers sat in the flickering glow, bound not by trust, but by necessity, and by the faint, unspoken sense that the storm outside was only the beginning. The cabin had grown quiet after their exchange, the fire shrinking into glowing embers that pulsed like a heartbeat. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a restless whisper, carrying with it the ancient sounds of the plains. An owl, calling low, the distant snap of ice along the river's edge, the unseen prowl of wolves. The Lakota woman sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the dark woods beyond. She did not speak, though her mind was loud with memory. The cowboy, worn thin by pain and travel, had drifted into a fitful sleep against the wall. His hat had fallen forward, shadowing his face, his hand still resting near the revolver at his side as though even in dreams he expected to fight. She studied him for a long time. Every line in his face told of hardship, scars along his jaw, sunburnt skin, the hollowness of a man who had walked too many miles with no place to belong. Yet there was something else beneath it. Something she could not name. Her people had warned her all her life about men like him. "The white man brings change, and change brings sorrow," her father used to say when she was a child. His voice echoed in her memory, steady as the drumbeat in ceremonies past. "They take the land, they take the buffalo, they take the spirit of the people. And still, some among us will bend to them, believing kindness where there is only hunger." She had believed him then, but belief had wavered in her youth. She remembered the settler family who once lived 2 valleys over. A man, his wife, and a small boy who had nearly drowned in the river. She had been the one to see him struggling in the current. She had dragged him out, coughing, his tiny hands clinging to her like a frightened bird. The settler had wept, holding his son, and for a brief moment the lines between Lakota and white man had blurred. He had offered her bread and thanked her, with eyes full of honesty. But 2 winters later, when soldiers came through, it was that same settler who guided them across the river, pointing toward the place where her people had camped. She still remembered the smoke that rose in the distance that day, the sound of her kin scattering, the cries of children in the snow. Trust was a fragile thing, and once broken, it cut deeper than any knife. Now here was this stranger, half dead, hunted, bearing the same face of weariness she had seen in so many men of his kind. She wanted to believe nothing good could come from his presence. Yet when she had looked in his eyes earlier, she had seen no greed there, no hunger for land or power. Only a man carrying too much weight, standing at the edge of his own ruin. She drew her blanket tighter around her shoulders, and closed her eyes. A voice deep within whispered that she was a fool for letting him inside. But another, softer voice spoke louder. What if he is different? What if his story is not one of taking, but of giving? The embers cracked suddenly, and she startled slightly, turning her head. The cowboy stirred, muttering in his sleep. His words were slurred, broken fragments. "No, don't leave 'em be, Sheriff!" He twisted, his wound pulling and his face contorted with pain. For a moment, she saw not the hardened drifter, but a man trapped in memory, fighting battles no one else could see. Her instincts pulled her forward. She dipped a cloth into the pot of cooling water and pressed it gently against his side, cleaning, where the blood had dried. He flinched, but did not wake. As she worked, her thoughts wandered again to her father's voice. Do not mistake weakness for goodness. A wounded wolf will still bite. But her hands kept moving anyway. By the time she finished tending the wound, the cowboy had settled back into uneasy stillness. She sat back on her heels, staring at him through the wavering glow. What tied them together now was not trust, not even kindness. It was something more fragile, a shared exile. She had chosen to live apart from her people, walking a line between two worlds and belonging fully to neither. And this man, he too was hunted, unwanted, set apart from both the law and those who claimed to uphold it. In that moment, she realized why she had opened her door to him, despite the danger. She had seen herself reflected in his brokenness. The night grew colder, and the cabin's logs creaked with the shifting wind. She returned to her place by the window, but now her gaze was less certain. Perhaps her father was right. Perhaps she had invited fire into her home. But deep inside, another thought whispered, one she could not silence. If the fire must come, let it come for both of us. I will not stand alone in the ashes. Dawn crept slowly across the Dakota plains, pale light spilling over the horizon like water from a cracked jug. The snow glistened faintly where it clung to the earth, though much had already melted into mud and deep ruts. The forest around the cabin stirred awake, ravens taking flight, the low rumble of a distant river breaking free of ice. Inside the cabin, the cowboy rose stiffly, grimacing as the wound at his side pulled against him. He had slept poorly, his rest broken by nightmares and pain, but even so, he felt stronger than he had the night before. The Lakota woman had not spoken much since tending his wound. She stood at the door now, scanning the tree line with the sharp focus of a hawk. "What is it?" he asked, his voice still rough from sleep. She didn't turn to him. "Tracks," she said simply. His hand moved instinctively to his revolver, though he did not draw it. "Bounty hunters?" "Perhaps," she replied, her tone low. "But not only them." He moved to the window, squinting through the frosted glass pane. The wood seemed quiet, ordinary even, but he had learned to trust the instinct of those who lived closer to the land than he did. She continued, "My people have scouts who range these hills. They look for game, for trespassers, for signs of intrusion." Her hand pressed against the frame of the door. "They will see your tracks, and they will not mistake them for mine." The cowboy's stomach nodded. He had known his trail would be easy to follow. Blood, mud, broken branches. He had counted on distance and exhaustion buying him a few hours, but distance meant nothing when wolves, hunters, and men alike could smell weakness on the wind. "How close are they?" he asked. She finally turned to face him, her expression grave. "Closer than I'd like. 2 sets of tracks, maybe 3. Men with heavy boots, your hunters, and lighter prints. Moccasins." The words hit him like a cold wave. 2 dangers converging. He cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. If it's bounty hunters and scouts both, then there's no place I can walk without stirring up a hornet's nest." She nodded once, her face calm, but her eyes betrayed tension. "That is what I warned you. You brought your enemies here, and now mine will see me as an enemy too. They will say I gave you shelter, chose you over them." The guilt in her words cut sharper than any blade. He wanted to argue, to say he hadn't asked for her help, but the truth silenced him. She had chosen to let him in, and now the weight of that choice pressed on them both. The forest outside shifted again, branches snapping under a boot, the faint call of a crow rising, and then silenced abruptly. "They're out there now," she whispered, stepping away from the door. Her hand rested near the handle of a small hunting bow hanging on the wall. Circling, watching, the cowboy reached for his revolver, his thumb grazing the worn grip. The metal felt both comforting and heavy. He was no stranger to being hunted, but the thought of dragging her into it left him unsettled. "You should tell them I forced my way in," he said quietly. "Tell them I threatened you, and you had no choice but to let me stay. That way they won't hold it against you." Her eyes narrowed, sharp as flint. "Do not think me a coward." "That's not what I—" She cut him off. "If I open my door to you, then I stand by it. Whatever judgment comes, I will face it. My people may be harsh, but they respect truth more than excuses." He studied her for a moment, caught between admiration and unease. She was braver than many men he'd ridden with, braver even than himself, for she had something to lose. The sounds outside grew nearer, boots crunching against frozen leaves, the soft rustle of leather against bark. The cabin seemed smaller. Now, walls pressing inward, the fire little more than a dying glow. The cowboy moved to the corner, pulling his coat tight and loading his revolver with a steady hand. The metallic clicks were soft, but sharp in the silence. The woman watched him, her face unreadable. "If you draw that gun too soon, you bring fire on both of us." "And if I don't?" he asked, his voice low. She looked toward the window again, her profile outlined in the pale light of dawn. "Then we pray the shadows pass us by. But I have lived long enough to know, shadows rarely pass. They close in until you can't breathe." A crow called again, closer this time, and the cowboy's gut told him the truth. They were surrounded. Hunters on one side, scouts on the other. The storm he had carried with him had finally caught up, and there was no more running from it. The day stretched long, heavy with tension. The cowboy and the Lakota woman kept mostly to silence, each listening with sharpened senses to the woods beyond the cabin walls. Every crack of a branch or flutter of wings set their nerves on edge. Neither hunter nor scout showed their face, but the air carried the weight of unseen eyes. By sundown, the fire was low again. The woman sat sharpening a skinning knife, her stroke steady, her gaze fixed not on the blade, but on the memory of what might come. The cowboy sat opposite, leaning against the wall, his revolver resting beside him on the floorboards. He winced. As he shifted, his wound still sore despite her tending. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You should know why they're after me." The woman did not look up from her knife. "You already told me. They call you an outlaw, a man running from the law." He shook his head. "That's what they say, but the truth is different." The sharpening stopped. She set the knife down and lifted her gaze, her dark eyes steady on his. "Then speak it. A man hiding behind silence is worse than one hiding behind lies." He drew a long breath, staring into the fire. The flames licked upward, their glow painting shadows across his tired face. He had kept this story buried, but tonight, with hunters and scouts circling, truth seemed the only weapon left. "It was a small town down in Wyoming," he began. "Not much more than a sheriff's office, a saloon, and a few shops strung. Along a dusty road. I'd been drifting through, working odd jobs, keeping to myself. Thought I'd move on quick. But trouble has a way of finding men like me. His eyes clouded with memory. One night I saw the sheriff and his deputies dragging a Lakota family through the street. A man, his wife, 2 children, barely more than babies. They accused them of stealing horses. Everyone in town knew it was a lie. Those horses belonged to a rancher who owed the sheriff favors, but in that place, the word of a native meant less than dirt. The Lakota woman's jaw tightened, her knuckles pressing into the wood of the table. "And what did you do?" He let out a humorless laugh, low and bitter. "What any fool would do when he can't hold his tongue." I stepped in, tried to tell the sheriff he was wrong, tried to speak plain truth. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp with old regret. But the truth doesn't carry much weight when men have already chosen to be blind. He shifted, his wound pulling as if the memory itself still cut him. The sheriff pistol-whipped the Lakota man in front of his family. The crowd watched. Some even laughed. I couldn't stand it. I drew my gun. Not to kill, but to scare the lawman off. One deputy jumped me, and in the scuffle, his voice faltered. The gun went off. The sheriff's boy caught the bullet. Not dead, but near enough. From that moment I was marked. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. He stared at the glowing embers as though they might erase the memory. They called me a murderer, said I was protecting savages, the family I tried to help. They vanished before morning, chased into the hills. I never saw them again. And me, well, the sheriff swore he'd hunt me down to the ends of the earth. Silence filled the cabin after his words. The woman's eyes burned into him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, he thought she might tell him to leave, to carry his cursed story elsewhere. Instead, she spoke quietly, her tone softer than before. "You risked yourself for my people. Few white men would." His lips twisted into a grim smile. "And look where it's gotten me. A fugitive, running through snow and mud, dragging my trouble to your door." She studied him carefully, weighing every word, every shadow on his face. "At last," she said, "perhaps you are a fool. But a fool who sees truth is better than a man who profits from lies." Her words settled over him like a blanket, unexpected and strangely comforting. For the first time in weeks, he felt lighter, not safe, not free, but unburdened. Someone had heard his truth, and she had not turned away. The fire burned lower, its glow soft and steady. Outside, the forest remained alive with whispers, hunters still circling, scouts still watching. But inside the cabin, for one brief night, 2 souls shared a fragile truce. A cowboy who had risked everything for justice, and a Lakota woman who had risked everything by letting him in. Neither spoke again for hours. Yet in the silence, something had shifted. The weight between them was no longer suspicion, but something closer to understanding. And though both knew dawn would bring judgment, the night had given them something rare. Truth in a world full of shadows. The first rays of dawn broke through the trees, staining the snow and earth in shades of pale gold. The cowboy rose stiffly, his body aching from the wound and from a restless night of half-sleep. The Lakota woman had been awake for hours already, moving silently about the cabin, her every action deliberate, stacking wood, pouring water, checking, her bowstring as though bracing for something inevitable. He pulled on his coat and adjusted his hat, eyes scanning the thin stream of light coming through the window. "I should leave," he muttered. "The longer I stay, the heavier the danger weighs on you." She didn't look at him. Her hands moved over a bundle of dried herbs, sorting them into neat rows. "If you go now," she said, her voice quiet but sharp, "you'll be seen before you reach the ridge. They are waiting." Her words landed heavy, but he didn't argue. He already knew it to be true. Still, something in him couldn't stand being the reason her cabin might fall to ruin. He lifted his revolver, checked the chamber, then slid it back into the holster. Better they take me than burn your home to ash. At last, she turned to face him. Her dark eyes held fire. You think my people so cruel? That they would rather strike at me than at those who hunt us all? You misunderstand. They will not burn this cabin for sport. They will burn it for honor, to remind me and you that choices carry weight. He wanted to answer, but the words caught in his throat. Before he could gather them, a sound from outside froze them both. Hooves, the steady crunch of horses moving through frost-bitten ground. The creak of saddles. The woman's hand tightened around her bow, and she moved to the window, peering through the narrow slit. Her breath caught. Lakota riders, she whispered. 2 of them, scouts. The cowboy's stomach knotted. He moved beside her, careful, not to show his face in the opening. From the corner of his vision, he caught sight of them. 2 men on horseback, wrapped in furs and feathers, their braids whipping in the wind. They carried spears and bows, and their ponies moved with the alert precision of seasoned mounts. The riders slowed near the edge of the clearing, their eyes fixed on the cabin. One dismounted, kneeling to the ground. His hand brushed over something, in the mud. The cowboy knew instantly what it was, his boot print. The scout rose, his gaze snapping toward the cabin, his expression hardening. He spoke in Lakota, words sharp and fast. The woman at the window tensed at the sound. They know, she murmured. The cowboy swallowed, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then I should step out now. Face it head on. No, she snapped, spinning toward him. Her hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. If you step outside, you confirm everything. If you stay hidden, I can still speak for you. But even as she said it, the sound of another horse rang out. From the opposite side of the clearing came the heavy thud of boots in stirrups, the distinct rattle of gun belts. The cowboy's blood ran cold, bounty hunters. The woman's gaze darted between window and door, tension radiating off her in waves. Both sides, she whispered. Scouts and hunters. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in. He looked at her, and she at him. And in that moment, they both knew the fragile peace of the past 2 nights had shattered. Outside, the scout called again, his voice louder now, demanding. He had seen enough to know a stranger was inside. His companion on horseback gripped his spear tightly, eyes locked on the cabin door. Then, from the trees beyond, a rifle cracked. A shot split the morning air, striking the ground near the scout's horse. The animal reared, neighing wildly. The bounty hunters had made their move. Chaos rippled through the clearing. The scouts shouted warnings, raising their weapons, while the hunters advanced from the trees, rifles aimed and eyes cold. Inside the cabin, the woman's breath quickened. It begins, she whispered. The cowboy's hand fell to his revolver, his knuckles white. His wound throbbed, but adrenaline surged through him like fire. He looked at her. This woman who had warned him, fed him, sheltered him, and who now stood on the edge of losing everything. This is my fight, he said, voice low and steady. But it looks like your people will have to decide whose side of it they stand on. The woman drew her bowstring back, the arrow aimed toward the door. Her eyes burned with fury and resolve. And you, cowboy, you will decide if you bring ruin or justice. Outside, war cries mixed with gunfire. The shadows had closed in at last. By the time the sun stood high in the sky, the cowboy was no longer free. The fight at the cabin had ended in chaos, shots fired, arrows loosed, horses rearing in panic. The bounty hunters had fled after one of their men was struck down, but not before the Lakota scouts had seen enough. They had seen him, this white man, inside the woman's cabin, fighting at her side. And that was proof enough. Now, bound by rawhide at the wrists, the cowboy was marched into the Lakota camp, flanked by warriors whose painted faces betrayed neither mercy nor hate, only duty. The woman walked beside him, unbound, but but her shoulders carried the same weight as his chains. She kept her chin high, though the whispers around her were sharp as knives. Children peeked from behind lodges, their dark eyes wide. Women muttered among themselves. Men spat into the dirt as he passed. To them, he was not a man, but a spark. Oh, spark that threatened to ignite dishonor within their people. At the center of camp, the council fire burned. Smoke rose into the sky, carrying prayers to the spirits above. The elders sat in a circle, their faces weathered by wind and war. Behind them stood warriors with spears planted firmly in the ground, silent as stone. The woman led him forward until they both stood at the edge of the firelight. An elder with hair white as snow lifted his hand. His voice was steady, each word deliberate. You have brought a stranger into your home, a white man, and now blood has been spilled on our land. Speak, daughter, why have you done this? The camp fell silent, every ear straining for her answer. The cowboy turned his head slightly, watching her face. She drew a breath, her voice firm, though her heart raced. He came to my door wounded and hunted. I gave him shelter because he was dying. It is our way to give food and fire to those in need, no matter who they are. A murmur rippled through the gathered Lakota. One warrior stepped forward, his eyes blazing. Our way is to protect our people, to honor the ancestors. And you, he pointed sharply at her, you chose him over us. You chose the enemy. The elder raised a hand again, silencing the shouts. His gaze shifted to the cowboy. And you, white man, what do you say for yourself? The cowboy straightened, his wrists raw from the bindings. His voice was rough but steady. I didn't come here to stir trouble. I didn't come to take land or cattle or blood. I came because men wanted me dead. Men who would see your people, crushed under their boots, same as they've tried to do before. A scoff came from the crowd, but he pressed on. I tried to stop a sheriff from hanging a Lakota man and his family for a crime they didn't commit. For that, I was marked an outlaw. That's why the bounty hunters chased me. That's why I came here half dead. Not because I sought her, cabin, but because I had nowhere left to go. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Some faces softened, others hardened. Then a younger warrior, fierce-eyed and bitter, stepped forward. Words. Always words. The law hunts him, his own people cast him out, and now he clings to us like a drowning man to driftwood. If we allow him here, we invite fire upon ourselves. His voice rose, sharp as the crack of a whip. Let us burn the cabin. Let us cleanse the shame. If she wishes to live like the white man, let her house fall like theirs will one day fall. That is justice. The murmur grew into a roar of agreement. Warriors struck their spears against the ground. Women cried out in anger. Even children shouted, repeating the word, fire, fire, fire. The woman's face was pale, but her eyes burned with defiance. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. If you burn my cabin, then burn me with it, for I will not be ashamed of showing compassion. The crowd stilled, shocked by her words. The elder's gaze lingered on her, unreadable, then turned once more to the cowboy. His voice dropped low, grave as thunder. The fire is not yet lit, but know this. If your story proves false, if your presence brings ruin to our people, then not only her cabin will burn, you will burn with it. The cowboy lifted his head, meeting the elder's stare. Then let my truth be tested. I'll not run from it. The crackling of the fire filled the silence. The threat hung heavy in the air, thick as smoke. Justice, vengeance, and survival, all weighed in the balance. And though no flames had yet touched the cabin, both of them could already feel the heat. The campfire still crackled long after the council dispersed, its smoke curling into the blackening sky. The woman stood in the shadows of her people, shoulders squared against the weight of their judgment. Her cabin, her honor, her very place among them hung on the edge of ruin, and though the night winds cooled the plains, she felt a heat pressing in, an invisible fire licking at the walls of her soul. The cowboy sat bound near the flames, 2 warriors posted close by, their spears angled toward his chest should he so much as twitch. His hat had been stripped away, his shirt torn from the struggle at the cabin, yet his spirit hadn't broken. His eyes followed her, not with desperation, but with a kind of grim resolve that seemed carved from stone. The murmurs of the tribe carried through the camp like low thunder. The word fire repeated itself again and again. Burn the cabin. Burn the shame. Cleanse what had been stained. At last she approached him, kneeling just close enough that the guards couldn't hear the low tremor of her voice. "They will destroy everything I've built," she whispered. "My father's land, my mother's hearth, even the beams my brothers raised with their hands before they rode to war. They'll tear it all down because of you." The cowboy didn't look away. "Then I'll not let them. Not one splinter, not one stone." Her lips trembled, though she tried to still them. "You can't stop them. You're one man against a nation." His mouth tugged into the barest shadow of a smile. "Maybe. But if they're going to set fire to your cabin, they'll have to look me in the eyes and burn me too. I won't hide. Behind your kindness, not when it's you paying the price." The words struck her harder than she expected. She had thought of him as a burden, a storm dragged into her home uninvited. Yet here he was, offering himself to the flames in her place. A man of a people who had taken so much from hers, now willing to stand between her and her tribe's wrath. Before she could answer, a horn blew sharp across the camp, summoning the people back to the fire. The council gathered again, this time, with the decision pressed to the breaking point. Warriors tightened their grips on their spears. Women clutched their children closer, whispering prayers. The elder rose, his presence commanding silence. "The people demand justice," he said, his voice carrying like a drumbeat. "This woman brought shame into her home. This white man brought blood upon our land. The fire waits. Their fate must be decided." The crowd growled with anticipation, like wolves circling the wounded. A torch was brought forward, its flame bright against the night, and then the cowboy stood. The guards moved to push him down, but he straightened tall despite his bonds, his voice ringing out over the fire. "Leave her be. If you want vengeance, take it on me. She gave me shelter because I was dying. She never asked for trouble, but I brought it to her door. Burn me, hang me, cut me down, whatever you see fit. But don't punish her for a choice that came from mercy." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Lakota woman's heart seized at his words. He hadn't pleaded for his life, hadn't begged for escape. He had stepped into the fire willingly, his head unbowed. He turned his eyes to the elder, steady as the horizon. "I've got no tribe, no home left. But she does. You burn her cabin, and you burn a piece of your own spirit with it. If there must be flames, then let them take me." The elder studied him, eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. The torch crackled in the warrior's hand, waiting for the command. Silence fell so thick you could hear the horses shifting in the dark. Every face around the circle leaned forward, breath caught in their throats, and then, softly, the woman stepped to his side. Her voice rang like steel on stone. "If he burns, then I burn too. For he is not my shame. He is my witness. My people may see weakness in compassion, but the spirits do not. I will not let his courage stand alone." The camp erupted. Shouts of anger, cries of disbelief, murmurs of awe. Some called for the torch to be thrown, others for mercy. The elder lifted his hand, silencing them once more. His gaze shifted between the cowboy and the woman, measuring the fire in their eyes against the fire in his people's hands. Last he spoke, a test then, not of flames, but of truth. At dawn, you will speak before the people once more. If your words ring false, if the spirits turn from them, then the fire will decide your fate. Until then, the torch waits. The torch was lowered, its flame hissing, into the dirt. Relief swept through her like a storm breaking, but the cowboy didn't sag. He simply met her eyes, a silent vow passing between them. He would stand, no matter the cost. The night carried on heavy with tension, and as the firelight flickered across their faces, they both knew dawn would bring either vindication or ashes. Dawn rose over the prairie like a blade of fire cutting across the horizon. The camp, restless through the night, stirred with the first call of the morning birds. Warriors gathered in a wide circle, their painted faces solemn, their weapons gleaming with dew. Women and children stood behind them, whispering prayers, waiting to see if justice would come in the shape of fire or something else entirely. At the center of the circle, the cowboy stood unbound. His wrists bore the raw marks of the ropes, but he carried himself upright, chin lifted, eyes steady. To his right, the Lakota woman stood with equal resolve, though her heart trembled beneath her ribs like a trapped bird. The elder stepped forward, his robe trailing in the dust, his face carved by years of sorrow and wisdom. He raised a staff decorated with eagle feathers and spoke with a voice that carried to every ear. "This dawn belongs to truth," he declared. "This man, this woman, stand accused. She for sheltering him, he for bringing strife to our land. They have spoken their intent to face judgment not with fire but with words. If their truth is hollow, the flames will finish what they delayed. If their truth is strong, the spirits will guide us to a just path." The crowd rumbled in agreement, though anger still lingered in many eyes. The elder gestured to the cowboy. "Speak." The cowboy drew a slow breath. He wasn't a man of speeches. His life had been sweat, dust, and gunpowder. But this was no time for silence. His voice, low but steady, reached the circle. "I didn't come here to make war with your people," he began. "I came here running from men who would rather see me dead than let the truth breathe. They call me a killer. They call me a thief. But I tell you, I've killed only to save lives, and I've taken nothing that wasn't already stolen from the innocent." He paused, scanning the crowd. Warriors glared, some skeptical, some curious. He pressed on. "Months ago, a sheriff and his men rode out against a Lakota family, your kin. They claimed the family had taken cattle that didn't belong to them. But I saw with my own eyes, those cattle had wandered onto the family's land, and the family gave them back without fight. The sheriff didn't care. He wanted blood. He called it justice. I called it murder." The cowboy's jaw tightened, the memory burning. "I stepped in, drew my gun before the sheriff's men could hang the Lakota father from his own tree. Shots were fired. I killed the sheriff to save a man who'd done no wrong. Since that day, I've been hunted. Not because I'm guilty, but because I stood against the lawmen who wear badges as excuses to kill." Gasps rippled through the circle. The woman closed her eyes, relief flooding her. Finally, the truth spoken out loud, naked and sharp. The cowboy turned then, meeting her gaze. "She found me half dead, running from the men who want me gone. She gave me shelter, not out of betrayal to her people, but out of mercy. She owed me nothing, yet she risked everything." His voice grew harder. "Burn her cabin, and you burn. Mercy itself. Burn her, and you shame your own spirits." Silence followed. The weight of his words hung over the circle like storm clouds before thunder. Then the woman stepped forward. Her voice carried no tremor now. It rang clear and fierce. "My people," she began, "you say I have brought shame. But I ask you, what is shame? To turn away a wounded man? To let him bleed into the earth and call it honor? Or is shame to forget that the Great Spirit sees all hearts, even the hearts of strangers? She looked at them each in turn, unflinching. Yes, I gave him shelter. I would do it again, not because I choose him over you, but because I choose what is right. If fire must take my cabin, let it. If flames must take my life, so be it. But know this, mercy is not betrayal. Courage is not weakness. And if you burn me, you burn more than a woman. You burn the spirit that binds us to what is just. Sauda camp erupted. Shouts, arguments, cries of support and condemnation. Warriors clashed in words. Women raised their voices. Elders murmured to one another. The air thickened with division. The elder lifted his staff, striking it into the earth. Silence fell once more. His eyes, ancient and piercing, swept over the pair standing in the circle. The fire waits, he said gravely. But the spirits do not hunger for flames. They hunger for truth. I have heard the man. I have heard the woman. The council must decide. Do we honor mercy and courage, or do we feed our anger with ashes? He turned to the people, raising his staff high. Speak now. Let your voices carry to the sky. Let the spirits hear your judgment. The crowd roared, their cries split between fire and forgiveness, vengeance and justice. The sound shook the very ground beneath their feet, and in that storm of voices, the fate of the cowboy and the woman hung suspended, waiting for the balance to tip. The prairie air grew heavy as the council's voices clashed like thunder rolling through a canyon. The warriors demanded fire, purity through destruction. The women spoke of mercy, of remembering that the Great Spirit's justice was never blind rage. The children clutched their mothers wide-eyed, sensing that history itself balanced on the edge of this morning. At the center, the cowboy and the Lakota woman stood shoulder to shoulder, shadows stretched long in the rising sun. Neither spoke now. Their words had already been given, blood and truth laid bare. All they could do was wait. The elder raised his staff once more, silencing the storm of voices. His gaze was hard, but not unkind, as he looked between the people. And the accused. You call for fire, he said slowly. But listen. Truly listen. Does the fire cleanse, or does it blind? Does it heal, or does it only destroy? I see a man hunted not for what he did wrong, but for the justice he dared to bring. I see a woman accused not of betrayal, but of compassion. He let the words sink in, then turned sharply, pointing his staff toward the east. On the horizon, dust clouds stirred. The bounty hunters, still tracking their prey, riding toward the camp like a pack of wolves. The elder's voice rose. The spirits send us an answer. The real enemy comes now. Those who spill Lakota blood in the name of greed ride here. Will you waste your fire on your own daughter, or will you turn your fire against those who truly wrong us? A roar broke from the warriors. Spears rattled, bows were strung, horses stamped the earth. The tribe surged with a sudden unity, anger turning outward, no longer aimed at the woman or her cabin. The decision was made without further debate. The cowboy tightened his jaw. I'll ride with you, he said. The woman grasped his arm. You owe nothing. They'll cut you down. He shook his head. I owe you my life. And if today's the day I fall, better it's standing beside the people who showed me mercy. The warriors mounted swiftly, the cowboy among them. The woman stayed behind, praying fiercely as dust rose higher, and the thunder of approaching hooves shook the earth. Moments later, the two forces clashed on the open plain. The bounty hunters, confident in their numbers and rifles, were shocked to find not one fugitive but an army of warriors waiting for them. Arrows darkened the sky, horses screamed, and the ground ran red with the blood of those who had come seeking gold and revenge. The cowboy fought with a grim determination, his revolver cracking in rhythm with the whoops of the warriors. Twice he was nearly pulled from his saddle, but each time a Lakota warrior closed ranks beside him, covering his flank. For the first time since he was branded an outlaw, he did not fight alone. When the dust finally settled, the bounty hunters lay broken across the prairie, their ambitions ended by the very people they sought to crush. Not a single Lakota cabin burned. The cowboy dismounted, bloodied but unbroken, his chest heaving. Around him, the warriors lifted their spears and voices to the sky, calling out their victory to the spirits. The elder approached him, his weathered hand gripping the staff. "You fought not as an intruder, but as a brother. The spirits see this, and so do we. You are no longer a fugitive in these lands." The woman stepped forward then, her eyes wet with relief. She whispered, "They rose, not against us, but with us." The elder turned to her, his voice solemn yet warm. "And you, daughter of our people, you did not betray us. You reminded us of who we are. Mercy is the highest courage. For this, no flame shall touch your cabin." The tribe erupted in agreement. Some who had once called for fire now pressed their hands to their hearts in respect. The decision was final. Her home would stand, and so would her honor. As the sun climbed higher, casting gold across the battered land, the cowboy and the Lakota woman stood side by side, their shadows long but unbroken. He was no longer just a stranger at her door, and she was no longer just the woman who risked everything for him. They had become bound by fire, by mercy, and by a dawn that carried justice instead of ash. And so the story ended not in flames, but in vengeance turned rightly, in honor restored, and in a bond that even fire could not burn away.